And welcome back. Now I'm going to ask the guys here to enlighten us on the criminal process. We'll look at two big cases, and we're going to start with Etan Patz. Patz, of course, the 6-year-old in 1979 who disappeared while walking to school in Soho. Pedro Hernandez, he confessed to the crime, but his trial ended in a mistrial last week when one juror refused to convict him. Now, the Manhattan DA, Cy Vance, he says he wants to retry it because the prosecutors had compelling evidence. So why did they get a do-over? Now, I know about hung juries, Mayo, but is there a rule of thumb? All you guys worked in prosecutor offices. This was 11-1. Is it, if it was 9-2 or 8-3, it wouldn't get a retrial, but maybe 11-1 does? Can you do it 2 times, 3 times to retry? I know there's not a hard rule, but is there an unspoken one?
Well, if it's 11-1, you're probably going to retry that case. If it's a bigger divide, let's assume it's an 8-4 or a 7-5, something like that, then you have to start thinking about it. But more importantly, you want to weigh how the testimony came in. Objectively, if the testimony came in and led you to the conclusion that there should be a guilty, verdict, then you probably want to represent. If you start walking away from that case with questions yourself, you shouldn't do that. And jeopardy doesn't attach unless you have a final determination.
Obviously, everything costs money, including putting on cases. But the question is, have you ever known of or been where they retried it more than once, where it was like the 3rd trial?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there are cases where you'll get the 3rd trial sometimes, and sometimes it'll be on smaller cases even, where you'll have a DA in a local court trying misdemeanors 2 or 3 times. And who it really hurts there is the defendant, because, yeah, the taxpayers are going to pay money, for the prosecution, but most of that stuff's already done. And you're not continuing to pay police to come in. I mean, you're going to pay them. They're going to may get some overtime. But each time you have an expert witness who has to come back for the defense, and each time you do a trial, you got to pay your attorney. Yeah. They're not going to be there.
It's about the evidence. It's also about ego. Okay, they tried John Gotti Jr. 3 times on really what was flimsy evidence, and 3 hung juries, and it was embarrassing. So it's about politics. It's about the evidence. It's
How
about
the likelihood that there'll be a plea deal, like in this particular case, 11-1. We all heard the juror, respect the juror and everything, but you're not going to find too many jurors like that. Maybe next time there won't be. Does this lead to negotiations to try and avoid the retrial once they throw it out there that it's a possibility?
Not likely in a case where it's 11-1 for conviction. There's a lot of political and public pressure on Cy Vance, and he thinks he's got the goods. As Mayor was saying, when you have a divide of 8-4, 7-5, basically the jury is saying to you, there's some doubt here, and maybe you need to plea it down and resolve it. But again, so many things go into it, and here he seems to think he's got the evidence and he's going to retry it, and it doesn't sound like the defendant's going to take a plea.
Do they have to start all over at a retrial, or can any of the stuff that came up in the first trial that came up in the course of the trial be admitted again in the second trial?
Absolutely. If somebody testified in the first trial, they have now sworn testimony. If they come in the second trial, if they change their testimony, they'll be impeached with their prior testimony. So yes, no, the first trial definitely takes a place in the second trial. And also, Rich, I got to tell you, if it's before that jury came back 11-1, the state was saying, but the state was saying that this man killed a 6-year-old boy. It's almost impossible for them now to not retry the guy or push very hard to retry him. Right?
Yeah. Well, Rich, the only other thing is that people confess to things they didn't do all the time. We tend to think that that's not going to happen, but we know it happens, and we know that based upon DNA evidence. We know that sometimes we find that the actual killer was still out there and ultimately admits to having committed the murder, and DNA links that person to it. So people sometimes give too much credibility to eyewitness accounts, as well as to the fact that someone may have made a statement that
I want to get to the second question about how the process works. Now, I go to Baltimore for this one. The prosecutor, Marilyn Mosby, many of you may have seen her or remember her, especially from that press conference. She wants to stop the defense from talking about the Freddie Gray case. She wants the gag order, not just on the cops, but their attorneys, because she's worried that the 6 cops facing charges could say something that will sway the public and potential jurors. But I don't know if what's good for the goose is good for the gander here. Apparently, she can say whatever she wants. Remember this?
To the people of Baltimore and the demonstrators across America, I heard your call for no justice, no peace. Your peace is sincerely needed as I work to deliver justice on behalf of this young man.
And even more recently, the crowd applauded Mosby when she took to the stage at a Prince concert in honor of Freddie Gray just a couple weeks ago. Okay, I'm sure this is softball city, but are the rules slanted for the prosecutor where they basically say, you, Jimmy, zip your lip, I don't want to hear from you or your client here. You're going to get more than a rap on the knuckles if I hear peep out of you and see you on TV, but yet the prosecutor can say what he or she wants?
This is foolish. There are rules, and every district has their own rules on the conduct of the lawyers and the conduct of the litigants and what they're allowed to comment on, what they're not allowed to comment on. The notion that this prosecutor is asking for a gag order against defense lawyers who really, by the way, are only commenting on her blathering about, in public about how she's going to seek justice, it's absolutely foolish.
I don't see this a lot, Mayo. I mean, for the layperson here, maybe you guys see it more often when the cameras aren't on, but is this like, one-on-one where the prosecutors say, we'll do the talking and you be quiet?
Well, the prosecutor normally does a press release, and then the case is picked up by all of the media outlets, and at that point, your presumption of innocence is generally shattered because people have drawn a conclusion before anybody even has all the information. Most cases are not after a 6-month investigation. The investigation continues well beyond the arrest. But when the prosecution does make statements like that, you can't turn around now and tell the defense that they can't also make statements.
Has a judge already been assigned to the case?
I'm not certain about
but
that.
But if one
Have they
has,
been arraigned yet?
if one has, wouldn't that be the role of the judge to say, both of you, cool it, I don't want to hear from either one of you?
But a judge would say that possibly. But a judge generally also will not curtail your ability to speak. Now, only when you get to the point where what you're saying becomes so prejudicial
Right.
or is inaccurate. If you're starting to say things that
Right.
are untrue, then a judge by all means should shut it down.
You know, Doug, one of the things that happens in both of these cases and a bunch of other things that we talk about on Wednesdays, for me, and maybe I'm with three guys, but all you guys have been on both sides of this, both as prosecutor and defense attorneys. I think the general perception from the public is, the deck's stacked in favor of the defendants, right? I mean, all they got to do is find one juror who buys their story, or, they got to be convicted of, beyond any reasonable doubt here, and a lot of guys will walk. But the more and more the system itself, it is slanted to help out the prosecution, at least as it relates with the rules, right?
Well, I mean, I never had the perception that it's in favor of defendants. I always think that it is in favor of the prosecution. When you
But I'm
walk
telling you,
in,
the general public thinks, I think,
with
it's the other way around.
With the
yeah.
general public, when they see somebody come in and say, I represent the state, I'm here to prosecute crimes and I'm here for the people, that's a big deal. And when a defendant's in the courtroom, I mean, he's basically like an exhibit trying to look innocent there, and he has all the rights of being quiet and not saying anything. And I think it's very difficult for a defendant to be in a courtroom with a prosecutor and the seal of justice up there, and God we trust. It's very difficult.
You guys agree?
I think that most people believe that you're guilty. The minute someone comes in and they're seated next to one of us, the jury thinks they're guilty, unless that person's their family member or friend or themselves. Then it's different. And normally, if you dig into it at all beyond the judge's initial instructions and ask anybody think that the person's guilty, they all say, yeah, well, you must have done something or you wouldn't be here. So there's your presumption of innocence right there. And the only time that you probably may have an advantage is a case like this, although the venue may be an issue for them in Baltimore. But generally, when police get charged, they are given some deference. They are given the benefit of the doubt. And they do have
Although
the benefit
the climate
of...
says that's changing somewhat, yeah.
The rules
Somewhat,
are
but-
so slanted to the prosecution. We get discovery at the last minute. We get, the admissibility, the evidentiary rules are so slanted against the defendant. When you actually get in the courtroom, if there's ever a stacked deck, it's definitely stacked in favor of the prosecution. It is.
When we come back here, I got a few different questions here that I'm very curious where the table will come down on. Al Sharpton's daughter, Dominique, involved in a doozy. She's suing New York City, saying she injured her ankle on uneven pavement. She's not alone in this, but nonetheless, the rocket scientist then posted pictures of herself hiking. So could she now be in trouble? Forget about not collecting. Could she be in trouble herself here with a false accusation or fraud?